discussion which promises that no one will get any pain. So a bit of IETF is not painful for anyone.
Нет, это мне не нравится. Бурные аплодисменты.
Another round of applause, please, for a longer time.
Добрый день.
Hello.
Немножко IETF никому не больно.
So a bit of IETF is not painful for everyone, but let's try to do more of IETF so that you start feeling some pain and to find this balance where you feel just a little bit of it. So, dear colleagues, I will join you in the beginning. So let's get a clicker, let's get the slides. The presentation itself is available among the conference materials. We will only briefly look through the introduction, and the panel is, of course, a discussion. It's not like some propaganda being provided from the stage. We truly want to get comments, feedback on these attempts to tackle the problem, why the operators and IETF cannot work together productively. So, IETF and operators. These are my colleagues, Paul Vixi, who already spoke today, and Oleg Muravsky from RIPE. They are connected with IETF, and I am also one of the directors in IETF. It's quite a painful issue to me. I am involved with manageability of IETF, and especially in the groups working with management solutions, we see a big lack of feedback on what IETF is doing and why the decades of work in standardization are not being put into deployment and are not being used in practice. A number of years ago, we wrote a document which shares about the mission of IETF, what kind of organization that is, what it wants to implement. So there are quite lofty goals to make the network functional, for all the users to be satisfied, for everything to be good, but this only happens in the dreams. So if what IETF is doing in the forms of standards, in the form of RFC, were suitable to everyone, if everyone was truly happy about that, if all the problems were solved in the ways that the operators are satisfied, rather than providing some results of our years of thinking to the disappointment of the operators. And of course, the operators need to be able to use what we have provided, and of course, we have to ask their opinions before introducing anything. It would be very useful if the operators were equal participants of this organization, and if they knew how to share their feedback, and it also would be useful for them to get information on what is going to be issued in several years as a product from vendors. If we see what's the reality, unfortunately, vendors and manufacturers of equipment and academicians dominate. So it's just less than 10% of participants, both in physical meetings in working groups. Less than 10% of people are affiliated with operators. Many operators do not know what it is and how to use this. We had different surveys, and I quite often speak on this subject. I'm getting consistent aggregated feedback from which I can judge that we lack the knowledge on how to participate constructively. We know that this organization produces RFC documents, but this is just a dry text and it's difficult to read it. Yes, it's English, but we do not fully know how to translate that into our operational language. And quite many products that are produced by IETF, they are academically beautiful, but they are hardly usable. So what is the image of IETF in this reality? Of course, the text in red is a bit of a joke, but still, IETF is a kind of an isolated group which is not fully connected to operational activities. These are clever engineers, and from time to time they provide the right solutions, but not always do they have the proper information on the problem from the operational side. And you, as users, as people in the operations, you see the problems daily. It does not mean that someone who has not seen the network in their daily activity have the same understanding of the project. On the other hand, many of you are not professional software developers for networks, and it may seem to you that this is quite an easy task, but if you look at this from the vendor's standpoint, they need to take into account a wider context, so they do not break other things. Sometimes it happens that the community says, no, we cannot use what you are providing, and they quickly do something on their own, and everyone starts to use that solution. So for quite a long time, the work was underway on BGP communities, and some vendors said that no, we are not going to be involved in that. In less than 2 years, large communities emerged as a mechanism that was useful to the operations community. It truly solves a problem, one problem, but still. And right now, large communities are universally accepted in the operations and are used everywhere. So IETF is like a game space for vendors, for them to make agreements between themselves, and for the majority of operators and users, it looks like someone is making these decisions for them. One more social issue rather than a technical one is that IETF has this story behind it. Like, it is quite friendly, but it's friendly in its own way. And if you come there without the proper understanding of the subject, the kind of answers you will be getting can be surprising. Surprising to you and to others as well. The situation is improving if we consider, for example, something that we had 15 years ago. So IETF as an organization is open not only for core participants, but also to those who can provide some feedback. And feedback from those who are using those technologies is highly welcome. The problem is we need to bring that feedback somehow. If we consider the inner life cycle of operators and projects, there are big groups, architecture, engineering, or sometimes deployment and operations. In the bottom, you can see the players which are interacting with these sub-organizations within an operator. And we can see that people who are closely connected with support and operations, they have the least opportunities to provide their feedback on what is happening. Integrators and vendors mostly work with engineering groups, and of course they say, buy our wonderful new shining router and your problems will be solved, as usual. People who consider what is happening in standard development organizations such as IETF, the sad reality is that not always do they have enabled access to particular routers on the net, because this can be dangerous at times. So everything is bad. What should be done? Let's make a big leap forward, and this is the last slide that we will be discussing here. There are many working groups, and there are around 120 groups like that. They are, so to speak, left kidney specialists, so they are specialists in their area, but they have no idea of what is happening overall. So that's a problem in IETF, because it works on components very well, but not on the bigger picture. You, as an operator, you need to have the solution of the implementation by some vendors. So if we take all the components, if we stick them together, is it a system? Well, IETF cannot give you them as a system. It provides the components. Also, working groups are aggregated by their areas of specializations, like routing, security, operations, etc. There are 3 meetings a year in different regions. Between them, there are virtual meetings on quite a regular basis, and each group is using that opportunity. One more important aspect, you do not have to take part in a physical meeting to take part in IETF. Physical meetings are just creating an opportunity to gather together and quickly solve issues which need to be solved together, and also to have some beer together. That's also an important factor. So as for the documents, anyone can provide your internet draft and provide it to IETF. You can write there whatever you want. But if you really persuade the working group that it is an important document, you then lose the rights to this document and you just become the editor. Then, when the working group thinks that it's a stable document which solves the issue quite well, there are some processes for it to transfer to the RFC status, and it is possible to do it in just a year if you work effectively. I see some shock in your eyes, but yes, indeed there are stories where it took a decade or more, but of course we need to take into account that IETF is a slow organization. The main criterion we have here is consensus. We need to have an agreement between all those who are working, and there should be no considerable objections. It does not mean 100% unanimity, but it just shows that all the main problems were solved. And again, a big leap forward in this presentation. The last slide. IETF works well with components. It does not have sufficient feedback, sufficient input to understand what kinds of problems are discovered, what problems need to be solved, and what you as operators want to get. So there is a possibility of open discussion and any kind of different feedback you might have, something that was successful and wasn't. Well, you can ask anything about IETF. Thank you. We will have questions in the end, but right now give the floor to our other speakers to express themselves, and then we will proceed with the questions. Please, Paul or Oleg.
So I agree with most of that, and some of it is controversial. But it is, I think, not as much of a joke as it might have been presented. The problem with something like governance is that you do it with people. And we have an attack surface. We are able to be gamed. So often what will happen in the IETF is gangs will form. Somebody who wants something will make their own side agreement with somebody else to support it. It's like any parliament in that way. But the difference is that you can get an artificial consensus, and you can often get a specification that won't actually work, but might favor some other agenda. My hope for all of you is that you will look at this, because we have a hideous selection bias problem. The only people who participate are those who have too much to lose if they don't. So it usually requires that you have a lot of time, that your company supports it. The rule is that real work is on the mailing list and the physical meetings are less important, but that is only the rule. The truth is, physical meetings are often where consensus is reached, sometimes in the hallways or the bars. My hope for you is that some of you will decide to dilute the IETF with your meritorious desire to see it be relevant and successful, so that we can shove aside some of the vendors or the old money powers who currently dictate most of the outcomes. Thank you.
Да, вот. Сперва обещали, что никому не будет больно, потом начали говорить.
First of all, it was promised that no one will get any pain, but later we realized that there is some pain in the process. To make it a bit similar to IETF, I will switch into one more language, which is Ukrainian, and you may understand what may happen at IETF when languages are much more numerous. I'm a part of that minority group in IETF, maybe less than 1% of programmers who are neither operators nor vendors, who are kind of different organizations that have to implement those protocols. And on my part, I can say that to work on the protocol which is completed and standardized is quite difficult. You are trying to do that, but you understand, oh, if only I were in that discussion room before, it would be much simpler to implement and it would be better for everyone else. I had a successful experience of that kind. I managed to get away with half of the standard. So every one of you who are interested in that, please take part. Again, as was mentioned here, you shouldn't take part in every meeting. You can take part in just some meeting nearby. It's cheaper, and indeed, the mailing lists are the place where the majority of work is being done. All of that can be confirmed there, and it is possible to take the protocol till the very end to introduce all the changes you want to make without any physical participation in meetings. So please participate, and that's the only thing that you can do on your part. And the things that can be done on the part the part of IETF, that's a question to others, maybe to Ignas and others. Pavel Gurin, I've got a question to you, dear colleagues. What's the motivation for operators to stimulate its employees to participate in IETF? I do understand what is the motivation of vendors, but what about the operators, why the companies can be interested to send their people to RIPE meetings? I can also understand, but what could be the motivation for operators to send their people or to encourage their people to participate in IETF?
The agenda of the IETF will be set by the people who show up. And if your company is not represented, then it's possible that the resulting agenda will not be aligned with your company's plans or needs. So it's a defensive reason.
Я немножко к этому добавлю.
I will add a little bit to that. If we consider the operators, there is a 2080 rule. There are like 20% of important players in this world, and they can do without IETF. No problem with that. But all the rest, the 80%, are dependent on vendors and integrators, and the vendors and integrators can only provide the solutions about which they manage to have the deal in IETF. And if you as a user are not providing your feedback in whatever form that is available, then you shouldn't be surprised that you are not getting the functionality you would hope for. Now, speaking about the format, indeed, operations engineers are much easier to get invited to RIPE, or anything similar if these kinds of events had opportunity to provide some aggregated feedback to IETF. This would be a good channel of communication, and this would avoid a situation where you would be able to explain this to your superiors, to your management, why you have to go to IETF, although it's not your main area of occupation. So we can rephrase it in such a way, it's not obligatory for you to get involved in IETF, but IETF will get involved in what you are doing. And also you can avoid paying for treatment if you are not interested in the result. So I do understand that the participation in IETF lays a foundation for the future, which we will have to face, but not always can we fully explain this to the management, and the participation in such meetings is not a cheap thing to do, and I don't know many people in Ukraine who would be able to participate at least once a year. But as for the DNS over HTTPS, which was discussed at the previous session, it was also approved by IETF, as far as I understand. So how was it possible? As far as I can understand, right now everyone is not satisfied with DNS over HTTPS. And so is this a procedure? First we approved it, and then we are discussing how bad it is. Okay, I understood your question. I will answer about the financial part of this question, and I will ask the Paul as an expert on DNS to provide the answer on DNS.
So this is the first time that the IETF has approved for standard something which disenfranchises network operators in favor of browser makers. And it is an example of what I said earlier. The agenda was set by the people who showed up. We did not show up. And by the time we started to complain about it, they had already set their agenda, and they had convinced each other that it was necessary, even if it was painful for some. And the only way that we could have had, those of us who treat it as a dangerous thing, the only way we could have affected the outcome would have been to invest more time in the IETF. It is dominated by the people who go.
По поводу финансовой части. Есть 3 канала спонсорирования.
As for the financial part, there are 3 channels of funding. Invitations from ISOC, the parent organization, that's sponsorship also, and also membership fees, the things that you are paying for the meeting. The annual budget is $9 million, and 5 million of that comes from ISOC, and then 50-50 from sponsorship and from registrations. So the budgets for the next years are approved already, and we cannot simply take the registration fee and divide it, let's say, into 2 or more. As we can see from our history, it is difficult to get a sponsorship. At some meetings we had to do without host, and that was a challenge financially, but the financing has to remain at the same level. Indeed, that's a problem, that participation in IETF is expensive. So the idea is to have some experimental working group, one part on the part of IETF, and another part is in RIPE, NANOC, Apricot, those organizations which gather together the operators. So you as operators would be participating in RIPE, something that you would come to anyway, and here you would be able to provide your suggestions to IETF. And also, this working group would be a mechanism of education. They would be able to explain in some understandable language with your community the new developments. One more request to share in your own words how exactly you are setting the initial terms based on which you are developing the standard, and who prepares these technical requirements. If you know that without the right conditions we do not get a proper result. Yes, indeed. There is a self-organization involved, and if people have some problem, they gather together and start thinking about that and to market this problem to others. Indeed. In mailing lists, in conversations, in different places, like this one as well. And so you can discuss your pains, you can discuss what can be done about that. There is no organizational structure that needs to be followed, no steps that have to be taken for IETF to start thinking about any kind of problem. And if you want to work on a particular problem, that's your business to persuade some critical mass of people and to persuade them that they need to work and they need to proceed in the way you want them to proceed. Also, hackathons, which have become an inseparable part of IETF, this is probably one of the most powerful tools of bringing in new kind of work for IETF. So people get together, develop some small prototype which is solving a certain problem, and then the issue of standardizing this solution emerges. Many working groups are using this output from hackathons quite actively.
I'd like to add something to that answer.
Sure.
The definition of the problem is itself subject to the consensus model. Often an RFC, which is normally a standards document, will be dedicated to a problem statement. This happened, for example, in the DNSSEC working group, but the problem was we didn't do it until we've been working on each of us working on the problem we saw for 10 years. And then finally, somebody wrote a problem statement, and then we finally knew what everybody else wanted to do. But whatever problem gets worked on, it's as my colleague said, it's the people that want to work together. And so if you have something you want the IETF to work on, you have to find a group of like-minded people who will then work with you on it and start the process of consensus, beginning with a problem statement, sometimes as a separate document. So it is in your power, is the point. You could define a problem and sell that problem and then work together on a solution. You don't need any special privilege.
Thank you, Paul. And last short question.
That's just a small remark. I'm Alexander Isavnin. Indeed, I want to support the idea that it is important to participate in the events personally, but at a price. Of course, we understand that ISOC is an American organization, and the price is set in such a way that it is more suitable for American companies. And for instance, in this part of the world, it is very difficult to get a business trip worth $800. So this American culture is having as its result Cisco and other companies which are followed by Huawei, who are creating the major part of the documents. Also, we know that, for instance, a RIPE meeting is a one-week-long conference, and it's much cheaper. So participate here, yeah, of course. And also, as Ignas has emphasized here that there should be support for newcomers, but previously there was a story with Linus Torvalds. Also recently we understood the situation with Richard Stallman, and we understand that if the working language is English, it may be a bit difficult for those who are not using it as a native language, and also if people are adding their own complexities with some technical abbreviations, etc. So maybe panelists will be able to give some advice on this. So what's your reaction? Yes or no? I will answer in one word, and it's an English word which consists of several parts. I assure of that. Non-over specification. Yes, that's indeed a problem. This entrance threshold to IETF is quite a big one. On the one hand, there is a language barrier. On the other hand, there are many stories you may know about. So, the language barrier is solved by means of translations, and this should be an initiative from a local region. So, if you want to translate the documents, or at least some summary once a month on what is happening on a monthly basis, if you want to get it in Russian, you have to create a community who are interested in this and who could do this kind of translation. And if you expect that you would be translating into 30 languages we are working in, that's of course something not to be expected, but we can provide help in the sense that we can help with what is important, what isn't, what deserves to be translated, but this has to be your initiative. So the answer is that yes, it can be done and it should be done. And you will be able to ask this question to the next speaker. And now a round of applause for our panelists, our guests, and everyone who asked.